Hi, today we are going to explain the plot of a movie called Shooter, which was released in 2007.
Sector Bravo.
Well, let's start with the story. Bob Lee Swagger, a highly skilled military sniper, and his partner Donnie Fenn are undercover on a mission in the mountains. Their job is to protect U.S. troops by eliminating threats from a distance. Bob is known as a very reliable sniper. He is able to analyze almost all geographical elements before firing. However, the mission turned into a disaster when the enemy team suddenly appeared from above in a helicopter. Without their knowledge, they tried to report to headquarters but got no response. Donnie felt that they could not win against the helicopter and invited Bob to escape, but Bob insisted on shooting at the helicopter. As a result, Donnie died horribly from multiple gunshot wounds. 3 years passed. Bob Lee decided to retire as a sniper, spending his time in a remote place where he lives quietly with his dog. Elsewhere, in Langley, Virginia, a colonel named Johnson is looking for a sniper to help him protect the president. Because in 1 week, the president will give a speech outdoors, so Johnson needs a sniper in case of an attack. His Russian friend then told him about Bob Lee, who is now retired, and after checking his file, Johnson immediately wanted to recruit him. He went directly to Bob's home and made him an offer. He asked Bob Lee to come up with a plan to shoot the president and how to thwart it, because Johnson was sure that Bob's plan would be the same as the plans of other snipers who wanted to harm the president. According to him, Bob is one of the people who really understands the right position and the right time to shoot. Johnson also admitted that the government had been infiltrated, so he had to ask outsiders for help. At first, Bob refused because he did not want to deal with the government anymore, but Johnson persuaded him and convinced him that the country needed people like Bob Lee. Hearing this, Bob remembered Donnie and his loyalty to the country, so he asked Johnson for time to think about it. The next day, Bob calculated the distance and layout based on the information Johnson gave him and practiced in the backyard. He realized that the location of the president's speech would have a very high risk of being targeted by snipers, but since there was no other choice, Bob decided to accept the mission offered by Johnson. He was ready to fly to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to carry out his mission after leaving his favorite dog behind. When he arrived in Philadelphia, Bob went to the location of the president's speech to organize security. He mentioned 3 cities that could be strategic locations to shoot the president. He then explained to Johnson several strategies that enemy snipers might use, after which Johnson offered Bob to be a supervisor during the president's speech and asked him to find snipers who might target the president later. The long-awaited day arrived. Bob was taken to the old building area to supervise. There he also met Simmons, a policeman in charge of escorting Bob Lee. At that time, Bob managed to calculate the distance, temperature accuracy, and wind direction to find out the exact time. Then he realized something was strange. Sure enough, soon Timmons shot at him. It turns out that Colonel Johnson is not a person to be trusted, and he is just a scapegoat. Fortunately, Timmons did not succeed in shooting Bob dead, but only hit his shoulder. Bob Lee, who managed to escape, then met an FBI agent named Nick Memphis. Quickly, Bob tricked Memphis into stealing his car. Before escaping, Bob handcuffed Memphis and then told him that he was not the president's shooter and that Timmons had framed him. Then Bob entered the car wash so that the police could not follow him. Quietly, he tore off the back seat to get the medicine that would plug his gunshot wound, but when he came out of the car wash, the police had deployed a helicopter that was now right above him. Bob then looked for a way to escape, which was to throw his car into the ocean. And he himself managed to get ashore after secretly hitching a ride on a boat. Meanwhile, at the FBI office, all of Memphis's colleagues saw the news that he was helpless against Bob Lee. They considered Memphis's actions to have tarnished the reputation of the FBI. He was then summoned to his superior's room, and again Memphis was blamed so that he would be reviewed. He considered Memphis's actions shameful, but Memphis felt otherwise. He was grateful to be alive when the attack occurred. Back to Bob Lee, after getting into the FBI agent's car, he hijacked another car. He realized that his face was already famous as a president's assassin, so he had to be careful. He then sneaked into the back of a grocery store to cut off the power to the store so he could buy some items he needed, such as salt and sugar, without being recognized. His tactic proved successful.
There is still no trace of Swagger.
The cashier who served him initially did not realize he was a wanted fugitive, but afterward the cashier called the FBI to report that there was a suspicious customer during the blackout. The next day, Bob decided to go to the home of the only person he trusted, Donnie's late wife, Sarah. At first, Sarah wasn't too sure about Bob's story, but considering that she was Donnie's best friend, Sarah decided to help Bob, and she also saw his gunshot wound, which was quite severe. Bob asked Sarah to buy a prescription for his wound. That night, Bob drugged himself so that Sarah could sew up his wound, even though she was not the type of person who was strong enough to see blood. Sarah did it anyway. Meanwhile, Memphis began to take an interest in the case of the president's shooting, doing research and calculations to find out how detailed the sniper was. As a result, Memphis concluded that the target of the shooting was not the president, but an Ethiopian bishop who was killed by a missed shot. It was revealed that the bishop had also spoken out about recent cases in Africa involving slavery and forced land seizures. He then asked for the address of Timmons, the police officer in charge of escorting Bob, to ask some questions about the shooting position. Unfortunately, Memphis's colleague told him that Timmons was found dead last night, and Memphis became even more curious, feeling that this was all a big conspiracy. The next morning, Sarah delivered sad news. She told him that Bob's dog was killed by the government, considering that Bob could go home anytime to get the dog. The president is still alive because the bullet apparently missed and only hit non-vital organs. After hearing the news, Bob was furious considering that his favorite dog was killed just like that. He then asked Sarah to send a photo of the car's license plate to an FBI agent named Memphis. He was sure that Memphis could help him testify that Bob was innocent. A moment later, Sarah disguised herself and went looking for Memphis, who happened to be eating lunch alone at the time. Sarah approached him and immediately gave him a photo of the license plate, saying that it was the license plate of the sniper's car from the other day. Memphis then ran the license plate back at the office and found a history of land purchases in Africa. But unfortunately, he did not get any information on who the owner of the plate was. He decided to go to the National Intelligence Agency to get more information.
He'll do what he's trained to do.
On his way home, Memphis was suddenly stopped by a van and kidnapped. He was held in a room by Colonel Johnson's men. He could do nothing as he was forced to wear a device that made him shoot himself. However, from a distance, Bob was aiming at them and ready to shoot, and one by one, the people there were killed by Bob's shots. Memphis thought Bob was going to kill him too, but Bob offered to cooperate instead, considering Memphis a neutral and trustworthy FBI agent. Upon hearing this, Memphis accepted the offer of cooperation, after which Bob invited Memphis to meet a legendary former sniper who now sells guns in Athens, Tennessee. Without much ado, Bob asked him about shooting techniques and wanted to know who could possibly be the original sniper in the incident, and set Bob up as the fall guy. The legendary sniper then dissected the case without having to come to the scene. Bob then asked how many people were able to use shooting techniques up to 2,200 yards, about 2 kilometers. And then based on his vast experience, he mentioned the names of several people who were able to use the shooting technique. However, it turned out that he mentioned Bob Lee's name as the only one still alive. Without realizing that the person was in front of him, he also mentioned a Russian sniper who had been arrested and a French sniper who had died. The legendary marksman also mentioned the name of a reliable sniper from Russia, Mikhailo, but he doubted that the man could still use weapons because the last time he heard, the man was paralyzed. Not long after, Bob Lee remembered meeting the man when he went to Johnson's office. According to him, this shooting case looks simple, but not all snipers can do it well, he added. Actually, the technique was used to trick the opponent and make everyone think the bullet was stray. In fact, the shot was right on target. Shortly thereafter, Memphis asked his FBI colleague to track Mikhailo's whereabouts and received information that the individual was now in Virginia. His colleague also provided the coordinates of Mikhailo's residence. Before they left, Bob decided to teach Memphis how to use a sniper rifle so they could protect each other. Meanwhile, Sarah, alone at home, heard a strange noise outside her house, and, unbeknownst to her, she became the target of Johnson's men, who already knew that she was helping Bob Lee. Arriving at Mikhailo's location, Bob and Memphis split duties, with Memphis tasked with protecting Bob as he sneaks into the legendary sharpshooter's house. Apparently, the house was guarded by several soldiers, but they were captured until Bob finally came face-to-face with Mikhailo. Without further ado, Mikhailo revealed why he had been working with Johnson, saying that Johnson and a conglomerate senator were one of the largest landowners in Africa. They often carry out dirty political practices that make many Africans lose their land. Not only that, the bodies of the rebels are buried on a hill in Ethiopia. That's why they want to finish off the Ethiopian bishop. After hearing this confession, Bob asked why Mikhailo wanted to reveal everything to him. Mikhailo also admitted that he was first threatened by Johnson, so he inevitably made a shooting plan and also suggested the name of Bob Lee to be used as a scapegoat. But now, after meeting Bob in person, Mikhailo realized he had made a mistake and told him that Johnson's men had held Sarah to lure Bob. Before Bob had time to thank him for the information, Mikhailo decided to shoot himself in the head, the sound of the shot ringing out and triggering the arrival of other military members guarding Mikhailo's house. As it turned out, the ambush expanded with the arrival of helicopters. But Bob and Memphis came through it all unscathed. Sometime later, Johnson contacted Bob to threaten him, knowing that he had kidnapped Sarah to lure him out. Upon hearing the recording, Johnson felt threatened and invited Bob and Memphis to meet. However, Bob had several conditions. First, they must meet in public. Second, the conglomerate senator who was working with him must come along. And finally, they agreed to exchange Sarah for the tape. When the time came, Johnson arrived with the conglomerate senator he had been working with, whose name was Charles Meekum. They arrived first at Johnson's designated location in the mountains. In the distance, they saw someone coming. They thought it was Bob, and their sniper shot him immediately. However, this person was not Bob. This person turned out to be Memphis, who had protected himself with steel plates. The real Bob hid on the other side of the mountain and started shooting at their sniper. He also shot the person holding Sarah, seriously injuring him. After eliminating all the snipers, Bob came face to face with Johnson and Meacham. Seeing Bob's expertise, Meacham offered Bob to work for him, but without thinking, Bob immediately refused. He then burned the recording of his conversation with Mikhailo. Memphis was surprised by Bob Lee's actions, considering it was strong evidence. Johnson laughed and said that people like Memphis and Bob would not win against him. Unexpectedly, several FBI helicopters arrived to arrest Bob and Memphis, but Bob remained calm because he was sure the FBI would trust him. At the headquarters, Bob was brought together with FBI officials to discuss the truth he wanted to prove. Bob also explained that he was not a sniper in the incident because he always locked up all his guns after hunting. He also practiced the techniques used by the hired sniper against Memphis. Not only that, Memphis also showed photographic evidence of the bodies of Ethiopian rebels who were victims of Johnson's dirty politics. When the FBI director heard all this evidence, he said there was nothing he could do because what Johnson was doing was outside the country's jurisdiction. Again, Johnson taunted Bob and Memphis, saying that they could not win against the law in this country because he had strong influence. When Johnson left the room, the FBI director could only apologize to Bob Lee and let him go. Having escaped all charges, Johnson and Meacham celebrated their success in killing the Ethiopian archbishop in a cabin. Suddenly, they heard the sound of breaking glass from upstairs, followed by a person falling and a car exploding. They immediately realized it was Bob Lee in action. He had come to settle things on his own terms and started shooting at them all by himself. For good measure, Bob put the gun in Johnson's lifeless hand and turned on the gas. Moments later, the cabin exploded. When he was finished, he returned to the car where Sarah was waiting for him.